In October 2024, we gathered at the PASI Legislative Summit to tackle a profound and troubling question. Why do our judicial systems seemingly disregard the Constitution, leading to the fracturing of families? The issue of parental alienation has evolved into a silent epidemic, often manipulating as a powerful weapon during divorce disputes. This manipulation not only harms the relationships between parents and their children, but also inflicts emotional and psychological turmoil on the children themselves. As policymakers engage in lengthy discussions about shared parenting arrangements, child support formulas, and custody regulations, the true victims, our children, are often left on the sidelines. They face the emotional fallout of these contentious debates while their lives are dissected as if they were mere bargaining chips in legal negotiations. It is imperative that we come together as a community to advocate for the meaningful change in our family courts. We must unite to ensure that the voices of children are prioritized, fostering environments where they can thrive rather than endure the negative ramifications of adult conflicts. Their well-being should always take precedence, driving us to demand legal reforms that uphold their rights, dignity, and emotional health. Only by standing together can we hope to create a future where children are shielded from unnecessary strife and their best interests at the forefront of every decision made.
Good. Right now, this is Carolyn MacCloud. We'll be talking about apathy. How do we unite and make a difference? Carolyn is a paralegal, advocate, and speaker. She's a dedicated mother of 3 and a survivor of domestic violence who has become a leading advocate for those facing parental alienation. Her personal journey fueled her commitment to provide essential support and clarity to others in similar situations. Carolyn has actively influenced Colorado policy for over a decade, notably advocating against harmful language in Colorado's HB 1350 and rallying opposition on legislation such as Kayden's law. Please welcome Carolyn MacCloud. Watch yourself.
I see it. We're good?
Yeah, I just want to make sure.
Can they all see me?
I think it's going to be, I'll double check. I'll be right
All
back.
see me, right? Hi, good afternoon. My name is Carolyn MacCloud. I just want to first start off by thanking Brian, Joni, and Philip for asking me to come here about 3 weeks ago and speak to you. So really very privileged to be here today, especially addressing such critical issues that we are. I mentioned Kayden's bill briefly when Larry was introducing me. How many of you are familiar with Kayden's law? A lot of hands in the room. Most everybody is. So we are seeing a lot of what is coming through in multiple different states, from Colorado being one of them. For the last 4 years, we fought bad bills every single year. In California, they were seeing a lot of bad bills, as well as with Pennsylvania. And I'm hoping that we don't start to see more and more across the country. Colorado and California tend to be some of the more leading states on some of these topics. I have been talking about this type of stuff for the last 10 years. And so what I'm about ready to share with you is kind of my personal journey, how I got to where I'm at now, as well as hopefully giving some ideas on how we can unite and how we can support more people to come forward and testify. Because that's one of the biggest things that we have is when I'm testifying on some of these bills, what happens a lot of the time is that we say really good things, but then there's louder voices on the other side who tend to come with more and more voices. And it's unfortunately, we are making laws that are only affecting a very small portion of a community when those laws are devastatingly affecting the masses that are happening. And that's what we're seeing a lot with Kayden's law, getting rid of judicial discretion, allowing children to actually testify against a parent. We're seeing some of those things happening in Colorado. So Kayden's law was put in at the very last minute, basically my understanding at the 11th hour. It was part of the Violence Against Women's Act, which was initiated by Biden years ago. So it was the Children's Against Violence Act that was initiated, that was put into that. And VAWA, if you guys aren't familiar, actually gives state dollars to a lot of the states who implement their laws. And so what they did is they implemented Kayden's law, which again is part of the Violence Against Children's Act, and basically said to all of the states, if you put this into law, we're going to pay you. And that's how VAWA works. Anyways, so like I said, my name is Carolyn MacCloud, and I'm gonna get a little personal here with you guys. Hopefully I can, how do I click?
It should be an arrow.
Just the arrows?
Yeah, two-side arrow.
Okay. So I kind of talked about apathy. Sorry, I'm a marketing person by trade, and so I got a little creative. But when we talk about apathy, we're really talking about the lack of people really caring about what it is that we feel should be important. And that goes for professionals, that goes for just about everybody involved. I don't think this is going to come up correctly. It's not. So I was just going to let me just go into some of my history. So like I said, I've been doing this for the past 10 years. I started my journey actually using my voice for an organization in Colorado called Violence Free Colorado, which is our statewide domestic violence coalition. I first testified on Colorado House Bill 1066. This was the habitual domestic violence offender bill. We got a unanimous vote on this. When myself and other survivors spoke at the Senate, one of the things that they had asked us is, why are we not making this a felony charge on the first charge? Why are we waiting till the third charge? And one of the things that the bill writers had said, well, we were just trying to stay with what most bills state is the 3 strikes and you're out. And I thought it was very interesting that a lot of the senators were like, okay, we know that this isn't right. We know that hitting somebody isn't right. You know, using that physical force isn't right. And they actually wanted to make it a felony on the first try. So that bill actually was a victory for a lot of victims in Colorado. And then I also testified on House Bill 1060, which made strangulation a Class 5 felony. Strangulation is a really chilling form of control because people can actually die very easily from strangulation, and you don't realize it until it's too late, right? And so it can be very chilling. And so we did ensure that that was recognized as a felony and felt that that was a huge victory for a lot of survivors. Then in 2018, I joined an organization called Moms Fight Back. Some of you may know this organization. And I sat at the planning table with Colorado legislators to address the myriad of issues that we see within our family court systems. You know, these are issues that are devastating our families in Colorado as well as across the country, but too often they're just going unspoken. So I also served as I served as a survivor on the policy board for Violence Free Colorado from 2016 to 2019, advocating for more robust protections. I also worked with Stand Up Colorado, a statewide initiative that aimed to help abusers recognize their harmful behavior and access resources for change. It wasn't about punishing offenders, it was more about offering the resources so that they could actually change their bad behavior. So you might be wondering why I'm standing here today as a DV survivor and talking about my experience with domestic violence. The point is that I didn't agree with them. I didn't agree with everything that they said. I agree with most everything that they say, but when my daughter, Brianna, was only 6 years old, she came into a supervised visitation with her father standing right behind her, and she killed me, literally killed me. She told me in her 6-year-old little voice that I was dead to her and I was no longer her mommy. And that broke my heart. And in that instant, I went from being that loving parent to a monster. Now, when I told my story to the DV community, that was one of the pieces that I left out in a lot of my stories. Because if you are to believe that children of abuse never lie, then I am that monster. But I'm here to tell you today I'm not. So in 2018, I got a chance to hear Dr. Jennifer Harmon speak actually at one of Phillips's Phillips support groups. And she was talking about how parental alienation is a form of an unrecognized domestic violence. And I thought, oh, here it is. Here's my missing piece. This is what I needed. This is the research that I needed to prove that this is what's really happening to a lot of parents. And that this isn't something that is just used by abusive fathers. And yes, my ex-husband was very abusive. Yes, he could have used that, but he took it one step further. He wasn't the alienator. He was the alienator in the fact that he was abusive, but he turned my children completely against me. Sorry, my daughter just gave me tissues. This is really emotional stuff that we all are dealing with. And I guess if we go back to talking about why we see so much apathy, I tried to do some research on this. There's really no research. So this is all from my own perspective for the most part. I can talk about how when we do see apathy, that for a lot of parents, there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of fear in coming up and talking about their story. It can be re-traumatizing for a lot of parents to come up and talk about their story. Testifying in public, you can worry about what kind of repercussions some of these parents may face. Do they have active cases that are going on? Again, there's some of the shame and stigma, the re-victimization that we see with a lot of these parents when they testify as well. And I've been doing this for a very long time. I'm now going on 12 years of being alienated from my children. I've been using my voice for the last 10 years to speak up on a lot of these issues. And while it's very validating for me to speak on some of these issues, I can tell you that the next day, I'm a wreck. The anxiety comes in, the emotions come in, and it may even take me 3 to 5 days before I can actually truly process everything that I have been doing, because there's so much momentum. You build up to this moment. I'll also say that there's a lot of lack of resources when it comes to trying to work with parents. Many are pro se themselves. They lack the guidance. Bills can be very complex. Sometimes they don't understand what the bills are. And then there's also some of the other barriers. Do they have childcare? Can they get there okay? Because of COVID, we saw a lot more with WebEx, and so it made it a lot easier for people to testify remotely. So that was also a good thing. I don't think that when we have professionals testifying, we talk about, oh, you know what? This wasn't the original PowerPoint. That's all right. So let me just back up a little bit. So when we're talking about apathy with the parents, a lot of them don't trust the legislative process either. They've already been so jaded by what's happened to them in court. How could they possibly trust a legislator at the Senate who says, oh yes, I want to hear your story? Or you testify and you find out that, I've been in a room where it feels like it's just so gender biased too, where it's like the father's rights against the mother's rights. And I've even said, this isn't a mother's rights or a father's right issue. This is a child's rights issue. It's our children who are being affected the most. There's also those fears of privacy. If they do have a case, or what if their children find out they're testifying? Those are other things that I think run through some of our parents' heads as well. Fear of not being believed. People can be biased when it comes to certain things in the family dynamics. And then there's the complexity that I also mentioned. I think I mentioned most of these already. The concern for public perception. There can also be cultural and language barriers. While just like domestic violence doesn't choose, there's no socio demographic of what a battered person looks like. What does an abused person look like? We have the stereotype of what a battered woman might look like: bruises, But what about the psychological abuse? What about the gentleman who has just been knocked down repeatedly emotionally, time and time again? You know, we don't usually represent ourselves very well either. And so I think there's this stigma that goes into all of this as well, that's gender biased. And then we don't represent ourselves well when we go in front of people. And so I hear about how, oh, so-and-so's an angry dad, or, oh, she's not allowed in court anymore because she became so irate in front of the state capitol. I'm sorry, this is a very emotional stuff. I have every right to be pissed off that you took my children away from me. 12 years without seeing my children. I'm actually one of the very few parents, or actually I feel like I'm very, very grateful because my daughter, Katie, is here with me today, and she reunited with me after 6 years of being alienated, and she's done a lot of work alongside me. In fact, we had our story aired on the Red Table podcast when they came out with their Ted Riley show on parental alienation and several others. I think Amy Baker was also had been on that show with them at the Red Table. And so she's been able to testify on numerous bills with me, and I'm very proud to have her because we need her voice. We need the child's voice in this fight with us as well. So going back to kind of sorry, my slides are not. Can we just take the presentation off? Yeah, okay. So where do oh, stop sharing. I see it. I see it.
There you go.
So if I go back to my DV training, we really talked about how, let me back up a little bit. So for the past 30 years, I think the DV community has done a really good job of shifting the narrative. They have gone from victim blaming, why doesn't she just leave, to he's the bad guy. Now, I don't mean to be gender biased in this situation. I really don't, because I do believe that men can be just as manipulated as women can. And I think that parental alienation is one of those tools that, because of our own psyche as women, we're not the physical perpetrators typically. The way that women tend to get back at somebody is by being manipulative and vindictive. And that's what parental alienation is usually about. It is about power and control over another person. And that is the exact definition of domestic violence. And so I go back to my domestic violence training and looking over the last 30 years of what that community has done. They did a really good job of amplifying the victims' voices and having the victims coming forward and really talking about that. But they also gave those voices a safe place to land. They nurtured those voices. They told them how to basically talk. When you're testifying on tough subjects like this, you have 3 minutes to testify, if you're lucky. Some states will only allow you to have 2 minutes. That's not a lot of time to get your points across. And so they helped to train us in how to do some of that. They did a really good job of building coalitions and support networks. I think we should do a lot of the same things. You know, we're a group of professionals that have all been affected by this one way or another, and we've all got very powerful voices. But when we come together, we can be even more powerful. They also launched awareness campaigns. You know, they went out and they talked to the health professionals. They talked to the lawyers. They talked to the bar associations. I know that there are a lot of professionals that are doing the same thing, but we need more. We also need more parents to get involved, to help out with editorial writing letters to the editor, opposing some of the bad editorial stuff that comes out, amplifying our voices out there on digital media, posting more on social media. Yes, I know it can be scary, but I think we can find safer platforms as well so that we can still express our voices and get the words out there. I think it's also important to reframe the narrative. Stop taking the blame for ourselves. I'm not a bad parent. I made some bad choices. I married an abusive person, but that doesn't make me a bad parent. It didn't make me a bad parent to be a recovering alcoholic either. So we gotta soften the blow on ourselves and put just the same way that the domestic violence community switched the narrative from putting all the blame on the victim, because I'm sorry, we're all been traumatized. We've all are victims in this room. Whether you want to admit it or not, if you've gone through anything like I have with parental alienation, we're traumatized and we're all victims and survivors. That is absolutely right. We are survivors.
And you actually are legally disabled. You have PTSD, stress and anxiety, which quantifies you as legally disabled, which means you want to level that playing field, you ask for ADA accommodation.
So Joni was just saying that that we're all disabled as well, because of the PTSD, the trauma, the anxiety. I can testify to all of that. I have all of it as well. I can also testify to the child adverse effects that we see with children as well. I worry about my other two children. I have no idea what's going to happen to them. I think we need to get better at educating the public and the legal system. I know that we've got some that are doing that, going around and talking to the Bar Association, and I'm so grateful for the work that they're doing. But how do we get in front of the legislators that are making the real decisions? And while professionals get really busy, when we had Kayden's law, I rallied just about everybody I possibly could. I had Dr. Burnett. I had, I know Yakov was there. I know that Brian Ledmer helped lend his voice. We had voices from across the country coming to help us, because in that legislation last year, actually, this wasn't Kayden's law, this was the bill last year, they actually wanted to say that in state statute, parental alienation was considered pseudoscience and that it was not a reliable type of diagnosis for family court. And so we were successful in getting that removed. But even just the challenges of having professionals come, I mean, you almost have to take a whole entire day off, because by the time they got to the bill, it was after 6, 7, almost 8 o'clock by some of the time some of these professionals were able to speak for us. And so that's also another challenge to take into consideration. So I know I kind of talked a little bit about a whole bunch of stuff, but I guess at the end of the day, the biggest question is how do we unite? Really the key to overcoming apathy and creating change is unity. We've got to have better unity. We need to come together as parents, as professionals, and as advocates to support one another in this fight, support those voices that are so importantly needed in order to make the change that we need to see. People, we need to amplify their voices so that those who have been silenced, and ensure that every parent who has expressed alienation feels empowered to share their story. We need to build coalitions with mental health professionals, legal experts, child advocates, look at all the different areas, from guardianship to family court. We need to figure out how we can really come together and unite from all areas and all little nooks and crannies. I know it's not going to be easy, but I do believe that the barriers to participation, they are real. They are deeply entrenched, but I do believe that by working together, by uniting our voices, we can begin to break down those barriers. We can create a community where no parent, no child, and no advocate ever has to stand alone. We can ensure that our voices are not only heard, but that they're acted upon. The path ahead is very challenging, and I know that. But I do believe that together we can create a shift that will lead to real change, hopefully lasting change. We can move from apathy to action, from silence to testimony, from blame to accountability. And in doing so, we can ensure that no more families are torn apart by the abuse of parental alienation. Thank you. Are there any questions on the process of testifying? I guess one other thing I felt, it didn't part of my speech, but just kind of dawned on me too, is that we had a retired judge who didn't even know the process. So when we When you're testifying at the state legislature, you have about 3 to 4 different opportunities to get your testimony in. When a bill is introduced, it usually goes through the Senate. Then it has to go through, or it usually goes through the House of Representatives. If it gets voted on the floor goes to a committee, and then it'll get voted on the floor if it passes the committee. If the floor of the representatives actually passes it, then it goes to the Senate. If the Senate passes it, then it'll eventually go on to the governor. Well, we were in the House of Representatives, and this retired judge had no idea that there were more opportunities to testify. And so I think it's our job to really put that out there. I do a lot of work with the National Parents Organization as well, and I'm part of the Colorado chapter. And so I'm working with Don Huben right now to hopefully put together some more videos that will help train people on how to testify. But yeah, just wanted to add that in real quick. You betcha.